In 1928, Herbert Hoover embodied the self-made man, this Gilded Age idea of someone who pulled himself up by their bootstraps. He lost his parents at an early age. He was raised by some poor family members. He was very smart, though. He went to Stanford, where he majored in geology. He actually was he was a member of the first graduating class of Stanford University. Quickly moved up through the corporate ranks of mining corporations. Was a millionaire by the age of 40. Directed mining operations in Australia, China, spoke fluent Mandarin, as a matter of fact. And as you know, he won international fame as an expert manager of American agriculture during World War I. He ran the Food Administration. And it fed not only Americans, but fed millions of Europeans, hence the international reputation. The Secretary of Commerce and the Commerce Department were created in 1920. He was the Secretary of Commerce from 1920 to 1928. Under Presidents Harding and Coolidge. He was a brilliant man, an engineer. No one seemed more qualified to be president. He said in 1928, quote, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before in the history of any land," unquote. Sadly, this didn't work out very well for him, and when the Depression pummeled Hoover, it's also sort of like it pummeled this idea, this Horatio Alger self-made man ideology. Shortly after the stock market collapse, the Depression spread throughout the economy. And Herbert Hoover turned to something that historians have named retroactively associationalism, sort of volunteer principles. The idea of encouraging organizations of farmers, industries, and bankers to share information and help each other. Hoover entered office even before the crisis with a plan to reform the nation's regulatory system, believing a federal bureaucracy should have limited regulation over a country's economic system, very different than Calvin Coolidge before him. He called himself a progressive and reformer and saw the presidency as a vehicle for improving the conditions of all Americans. And he called this public-private cooperation volunteerism, or again, retroactively historians call it associationalism. And he saw volunteerism as a preferable to government coercion or intervention, which he saw as opposed to the American ideals of individualism, self-reliance. But nevertheless, he was not an advocate of laissez-faire. So when the crisis hit, he said, let's stick to associational principles. Farmers, restrict your output. Voluntarily do that. That'll help slow the deflationary death spiral. Industrialists, hold wages at pre-depression levels. That also will help slow the spiral. Bankers, lend each other money to help each other stay solvent. And government will provide information, strategies of mutual aid, occasional loans, and morale-boosting speeches. Unfortunately, this would not be enough. And his credit, he realized it would not be enough, so he did some other things. To ease the problems in Europe, he arranged a one-year moratorium on loan payments by European governments to American banks. That was kind of too little too late, but he did. And he steered through Congress something called the Glass-Steagall Act in 1932, so named for its authors, Senator Carter Glass of Virginia and Representative Henry Steagall of Alabama. And this was designed really to help American banks meet the demands of European depositors who wanted to convert their dollars to gold. Basically, it allowed them some way to do that without having more gold. It was sort of designed to ease deflation. It was designed to be slightly inflationary, but frankly had a very minor effect. Too little, too late. So the Glass-Steagall was no panacea. Hoover also began to expand the government's economic role beyond volunteerism. He saw the creation of something called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC, which was created in 1932. It made $2 billion available to ailing banks and corporations that were willing to build low-cost housing, bridges, and other public works, trying to prime the fiscal pump, trying to get things going. The RFC was the biggest peacetime intervention by the government to the U.S. economy ever. The Home Loan Bank Board, set up the same year, offered money to savings and loans, mortgage companies, and other financial institutions who serve the home construction markets. Like, go keep lending and we'll buy your mortgages. So here's some more money. Trying to prop up the housing market. Despite all this, however, Herbert Hoover was uncomfortable with the idea of government restoring economic welfare. In 1932, RFC expenditures created the largest peacetime government deficit, budget deficit in U.S. history. Hoover attempted to balance the budget by supporting the Revenue Act of 1932, which would erase the deficit by raising taxes. Now, this is exactly the wrong thing to do, but to be fair, economic thinkers didn't realize, or most of them didn't realize this at the time, but if he's going to balance the budget, which seems prudent, by raising taxes, he's going to suck more money out of the economy. He also insisted the RFC loan only to relatively healthy organizations in favor of projects like toll bridges that would eventually become self-financing. Well, this limits the stimulative effect of what the RFC could do. It therefore spent less money than Congress mandated. There weren't enough good projects out there. Hoover was especially reluctant, and this is important, to provide direct relief to the unemployed and homeless. Just give people money, fearing it would erode their desire for work, lower their self-worth, and decrease their capacity for citizenship. This is a result of these very successfully implanted Gilded Age ideologies, self-made man, that kind of thing. He saw no peril, however, in extending aid to banks and businesses, and critics attacked this. He, at one point, approved money to help Arkansas farmers feed their stock, but he wouldn't give money directly for them to feed their family. He once rejected a request from the city of Chicago to help pay teachers and municipal workers rather than lay them off. But then he almost immediately granted a huge loan to rescue a bank in that city. People noticed this, and his popularity plummeted. Now, in the spring of 1932, a group of Army veterans emotionally challenged Herbert Hoover's policy. In 1924, Congress had authorized a $1,000 bonus for World War I vets in the form of a certificate that would mature in 1945. So, in 1924, Congress passed this. If you're a World War I vet, you get a little certificate, and that's like a bond that's going to mature, and you're going to get your $1,000 in 1945. Vets wanted the bonus immediately. They were desperate and said, we need the money now. Why don't you go ahead and pay us the money now? And honestly, that would have been we know now, that would have been a logical fiscal stimulus move. You're going to pay it eventually anyway. Why not pay it now when the economy's rock bottom, maybe get something going? A group from Portland called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force, the BEF, after the American Expeditionary Force of World War I. They rode empty boxcars east to stage a march on Washington. And by the time this army, quote-unquote, reached Washington, it swelled to 20,000 people, including wives and children. It set up camp at Anacostia Flats, southeast of the Capitol, and demanded the early payment of the bonus. The House agreed, but the Senate did not, and Herbert Hoover refused to meet with them. In July, federal troops were sent to expel the bonus marchers. We see some fires here with the Capitol in the background. They were under the command of Army Chief of Staff Douglas MacArthur, who was the son of Arthur MacArthur, of course, the man who led the American forces in the Philippines. He would become, of course, the Supreme Allied Commander in the Pacific Theater. One of his aides was none other than Dwight Eisenhower, who would, of course, become the Supreme Allied Commander overall World War II and would become a U.S. president. And to buttress his forces, MacArthur had some tanks under the command of none other than General George Patton. They burned the camp, dispersed the protesters. They injured several hundred people. They killed an infant accidentally. This attack hardened feelings against Hoover, and he was voted out in 1932 despite the fact the Republicans had dominated politics for 36 years, except for Woodrow Wilson. Things were about to change.